She was a warrior who had spent her life navigating the complex chain of command, yet she found herself in a foreign land, a small coastal town where the loudest voice belonged to the crashing waves, not the shout of a drill instructor. Alexandra Vance had given 22 years of her life to the United States Navy. She had risen through the ranks with a quiet intensity, a woman who could calculate the fuel consumption of an entire carrier strike group in her head, while simultaneously diffusing a diplomatic incident with a foreign admiral. Now, at 43, she was simply Alex, a woman trying to find her footing on solid ground after her entire world had been the steady, rolling deck of a flagship. The transition from active duty had been her own choice, a carefully planned, strategic withdrawal, as she liked to think of it. She had done her time, served her country, and achieved a rank few women ever saw. She was a rear admiral, lower half, a one-star who had effectively led the administrative and logistical heartbeat of the naval fleet in the Pacific. But the title felt like a uniform she had hung in the back of her closet. Here, in the civilian world, it held no currency. People saw a tall, fit woman with sharp eyes and close-cropped graying hair. They didn't see the years of sacrifice, the weight of responsibility for thousands of souls, and the loneliness of command. She had chosen this town for its anonymity. It was the kind of place where people went to disappear or to find themselves. The main street was a single, charming strip of boutique shops, art galleries, and seafood restaurants that smelled of salt and butter. It was a world away from the sterile, functional corridors of the Pentagon or the awesome, terrifying power of a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier. Alex rented a small cottage a block from the beach, a place with whitewashed walls and the constant, rhythmic shush-shush-shush of the ocean, a sound that was both foreign and deeply soothing. She spent her days walking for miles on the damp sand, the wind stinging her face, trying to silence the constant hum of strategic thinking in her brain and just be. On this particular evening, the hum was louder than usual. The quiet of the cottage felt oppressive. She needed noise, light, the messy proximity of other humans. She pulled on a simple navy blue sweater and jeans, a far cry from her service khakis, and walked into town. The Salty Dog was the liveliest place on the strip, as a sprawling bar with a weathered deck that jutted out over the sand. The sound of a classic rock cover band and the raucous laughter of a Friday night crowd spilled out onto the street. Alex took a deep breath, the kind she used to take before walking into a tense briefing, and pushed open the door. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of beer and cheap perfume. The band was adequate, the crowd was young, and Alex immediately felt her age. She navigated her way to the bar, her posture naturally straight, her movements economical and precise, a stark contrast to the slouched, stumbling patrons around her. She ordered a gin and tonic, something simple and sharp, and found a sliver of space against a wooden pillar. She was an observer, a skill honed over decades of watching and assessing. She noted the drunk college kids trying too hard to impress each other, the group of women on a bachelorette party, their screeches piercing the music, and the old-timers at the end of the bar nursing whiskeys and ignoring the chaos. Then, the energy in the room shifted slightly. A new group had entered, a pack of men in their late 20s, radiating the kind of aggressive confidence that comes from a few too many drinks and a lifetime of never being told no. They were loud, their laughter too sharp, their movements too big for the crowded space. They pushed their way to the bar, shouldering past people with a deliberate lack of apology. Alex watched them with a cold, clinical detachment, cataloging them as a potential threat. And the leader of the pack was a bull of a man with a jarhead haircut and a Semper Fi tattoo curling around his thick neck. He had the look of a Marine, the kind who thought his service was a license to be an asshole in civilian life. He ordered a round of shots, his voice a gravelly roar that cut through the music. As the bartender lined up the glasses, the Marine, whose name was apparently Luke, turned around, his back to the bar. His eyes, already glazed, scanned the crowd and landed on a young woman trying to get past him. She was pretty, with long blonde hair, and was clearly just trying to reach her friends on the other side. "Excuse me," she said, her voice polite but firm. Luke didn't move. He just smiled, a slow, ugly thing. "Whoa there, beautiful. Where's the fire?" He put a hand on her arm, his grip a little too tight. And the girl tried to pull away, a flicker of fear in her eyes. "Let go of me!" His friends laughed, a chorus of encouragement. "Come on, just one drink with a real American hero," Luke leered, pulling her closer. The girl's friends saw what was happening, but they were on the other side of the crowd, frozen, unsure of what to do. The bouncer was at the front door, oblivious. In that moment, the crowded, noisy bar shrank to a single point of conflict for Alex. She saw the girl's fear, the man's brutish arrogance, and the cowardice of his friends. She saw a situation escalating, a predator asserting his dominance in the most primal way. It was a complete breakdown of order. Without a conscious thought, her training kicked in. She didn't strategize, she didn't calculate. She acted. She placed her glass down on the bar, and the motion silent and precise. She moved through the crowd, not pushing, but slipping through gaps with an eerie grace, a shark fin cutting through water. In seconds, she was standing directly behind the Marine. She didn't touch him, she simply spoke, her voice low and calm, but with a timbre of absolute command that had silenced angry officers and steadied panicked ensigns. "The lady asked you to let her go." The effect was immediate. The Marine's head snapped around, his eyes wide with surprise. He had been so wrapped up in his own performance that he hadn't sensed her approach. His surprise quickly morphed into anger. He released the girl, who stumbled back into the arms of her now arriving friends. He turned to face Alex fully, towering over her by a good 6 inches and at least 50 pounds of muscle. He puffed out his chest, and the Marine Corps tattoo stretching with the movement. "And who the hell asked you to get involved, Grandma? You looking for a good time, too?" His friends snickered. Alex didn't move. Her face was a mask of calm, but her eyes were like chips of Arctic ice. She had faced down men with far more power than this fool, men who controlled billions of dollars of military hardware. A drunk in a bar held no terror for her. "I'm giving you one chance to walk away," she said, her voice never rising. "You're making a scene. You're embarrassing yourself in the uniform you're wearing." The mention of the uniform was the spark. The Marine's face flushed a deep, angry red. "You don't know anything about my uniform, lady? I fought for this country. I'm a Marine. What have you ever done? Pour coffee for some general?" He jabbed a thick finger into her shoulder, a hard, disrespectful shove meant to knock her off balance. It was the worst mistake he could have made. To him, it felt like he had just tried to push a brick wall. Alex didn't stumble. Her core tightened, her feet rooted to the floor in a stance drilled into her decades ago at the Naval Academy. In the same fluid motion, her hand snapped up and seized his outstretched wrist. Her grip was like a steel trap, her thumb pressing into a nerve cluster on the inside of his arm. The look of smug superiority on his face melted into one of sudden, agonizing confusion. He tried to pull back, but he couldn't break her hold. She was in complete control. "What the hell?" he grunted, his eyes wide with pain and disbelief. Alex leaned in, and her voice a whisper that only he could hear, cutting through the sudden silence that had fallen over their immediate vicinity. "You think you're a Marine? A Marine respects the chain of command. A Marine protects those who can't protect themselves. You're not a Marine tonight. You're just a bully in a bar." With a final sharp twist of her wrist, she applied pressure to the joint, a simple, devastatingly effective joint lock. The big man yelped and went down on one knee, his arm twisted behind his back at a painful angle. The whole confrontation had lasted perhaps 15 seconds. The bar was now truly silent, the music suddenly seeming distant and irrelevant. Everyone was staring at the scene. The massive tattooed man kneeling on the floor, his face a mask of pain and humiliation, and the calm, a gray-haired woman in the navy sweater holding him there with an effortless, terrifying grace. His friends stood frozen, their drunken bravado completely evaporated. They had no idea how to process what they had just seen. The bouncer finally arrived, pushing through the crowd. "All right, break it up. What's going on here?" He looked at the man on the floor, then at Alex. She looked at the bouncer, her expression unchanged. She gave the Marine's wrist one final subtle twist, a punctuation mark to the lesson, and then released him. He stumbled to his feet, cradling his arm, his face a mixture of rage and utter humiliation. He looked at his friends, looking for backup, but they wouldn't meet his eyes. The crowd, which had been silent, began to murmur. It was a murmur of disbelief, of awe. The girl Alex had rescued pushed forward, on her eyes wide. "Thank you," she whispered. "He wouldn't let me go. Thank you so much." Alex just gave her a short, sharp nod, a gesture that was pure military acknowledgement. "Are you all right?" The girl nodded, tears welling in her eyes. The Marine, Luke, finally found his voice, a high, indignant whine. "You're gonna regret that, you crazy bitch! Do you know who I am?" He took a half step towards her, his fists clenching, the sheer force of his wounded ego overriding the searing pain in his wrist and the clear lesson in physics he had just been taught. It was a final, pathetic act of defiance. It was in that charged moment of silence, as the crowd watched with bated breath, that a new voice cut through the tension. It was deep, clear, and laced with the unmistakable authority of a seasoned officer. "Oh, Admiral on deck!" Every fiber of Alex's being screamed at her to stand at attention. It was a conditioned response, etched into her nervous system over 2 decades. But she didn't move. She didn't have to, because the command hadn't come from within her. It had come from the edge of the crowd. A man was pushing his way to the front. He was older, perhaps 60, with a ramrod straight back and the weathered, no-nonsense face of a career sailor. He was wearing a worn leather jacket over a Naval Academy sweatshirt. He stopped a few feet from Alex and the floundering Marine, his eyes moving from Alex's calm face to the man's enraged one. He completely ignored the Marine and addressed Alex with a crisp, respectful nod. "Ma'am, it's an honor." The Marine, Luke, looked from the old man to Alex and back again, his face a perfect picture of confusion. "Admiral," he sputtered. "Her? What the hell are you talking about, old man?" The man in the leather jacket slowly turned to face the Marine. His eyes were cold, filled with a contempt far more profound than anything Alex had shown. "That," he said, his voice quiet but carrying in the stunned silence, "is Rear Admiral Alexandra Vance. I served under her on the USS Carl Vinson. She was the reason a strike group of 15 ships and 9,000 sailors could move as one. She was the brain of the entire fleet. She has more authority in her little finger than you, and your whole sorry squad of weekend warriors will ever have." He then looked the man up and down, his gaze resting pointedly on the Semper Fi tattoo. "And you just put your hands on her. You just threatened a flag officer of the United States Navy. Son, you have made the single biggest mistake of your entire pathetic life.